In the cycles of complexity that I talked about so much last season, adversity came up quite a bit. In one of my favorite episodes, we talked about the fact that we need this adversity in order to grow. In fact, if we were designed to be perfect, it's the adversity in our lives that sculpts us toward that perfection. As I believe that someone who becomes closer to perfect due to overcoming adversity is more perfect than someone who begins with that level of perfection without having gone through the adversity to win it. Jim Rohn says that our values must be won like in battle, and they must be defended forever. The battle he speaks of is the adversity that we all face every day of our lives. All good will be attacked. Everything we try to do to grow and build ourselves will, on some level, come up against obstacles. And you face a choice with each obstacle. You can overcome it or you can yield to it. Values, strength, and wisdom are won and gained by choosing not to allow the obstacle to stop you. Life is the upward struggle against the downward pull of gravity. There are so many and varied causes of adversity that it's difficult to even make a list, but one certain way we all encounter is in dealings with others. To overcome this, there are some principles that we can learn and skills that we can attain that will not necessarily ease the burden, but certainly cause us to be up to the task. One of the foremost causes of adversity is other people. Let's face it, we all want different things. Even if we're on the same team, heading for the same goal, we have different ideas on how to get there. And all of this will cause conflict. My guest today is Jerry Fu, a coach and conflict resolution specialist. And he's got some very practical advice for conflict resolution, as well as some excellent productivity tips. And he's ready to share it all with us in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Second Mix podcast, where we reflect, revise, and remix our lives. I love to talk about things that matter with people who care, and I'm here today with a dose of self-development to help make you better, stronger, and wiser. My name is Matt Bennett, and I'm bringing you some old school personal development from the original masters of motivation, as well as interviews with entrepreneurs, authors, coaches, and consultants, anyone who has a mission of making things better. So Jerry, I want to start hearing what you do in your words. What do you usually tell people at a party if they say, "What do you do?"
The line that I'm trying to refine is, I help Asian American leaders deal with conflict better by coaching them.
So in what brought you about to want to resolve conflict, to want to teach people how to resolve conflict?
It's kind of like with my leadership journey, and I can unpack my career journey in the process of this. But the line I'll lead with is that conflict resolution has been one of my greatest struggles and has now become one of my greatest fascinations. And what I mean by that is like this. Growing up in an Asian household, my parents were very much about letting guests save face, and any resentment that we had, whether they committed faux pas or, things like that they didn't realize, right? We just had to get over it. And I found that even as I didn't like conflict and I didn't like it when people were upset with me, anything like that, I would just run or avoid, or I would just, find a way to get over it, even if I wasn't really over it. And so all this resentment just built up. And, after a while, you just realize that this wasn't a healthy way of dealing with it. It wasn't until I took on leadership positions in my journey as a pharmacist prior to me opening my coaching business, where I realized that if I did not get better at conflict, I was going to get in trouble. Part of the journey involves me when I finally took on a manager position in a pharmacy I was working for at the time. I actually got written up by management because I was not keeping my technicians in line. They were behaving badly. I wasn't writing them up because I was trying to show them grace, but ultimately I was just still avoiding them. Like, even if that was the reason I was saying, I wasn't, disciplining them for whatever reason. And between all the personal challenges I've dealt with, at one point, one crazy story I had when I was a church class director, I actually had to confront the newer guy for sexually harassing some of the women in the class. And so you just keep coming across grenade after grenade, and you're just like, okay, I got to keep falling on these. And I just trust that if I fall on enough of them, that somehow I'll get better at it. So yeah, basically when I was looking for a niche, when I opened up my coaching business, because I wanted to help Asian American professionals in the same way I wish I'd been helped 10 years ago. And I said, well, there's plenty of leadership coaches out there. How do I distinguish myself, how to position myself a little differently? And so I said, okay, I have to niche down to, people like myself that I know have the same struggles, and also to focus on an angle that most people don't focus on, which is the specific resolution piece where you have to deal with, maybe you have a boss who's not competent. Maybe you have a colleague who is not pulling his weight. Maybe you have a roommate who is, leaving dirty dishes in the sink. It doesn't matter, right? Whether big stakes or small stakes, you will have conflict. And when you resolve that conflict, guess what's waiting for you? A bigger conflict. And so it's like you just got to get better at it all the time.
Let me ask you. So you find yourself in the past coming up against conflict, and did you just get better and better through time, or did you turn to any resources? Did you go anywhere to try to figure out what to do?
Oh, of course. No, I mean, if I would never be so pretentious to say, no, I figured this all out on myself. The easiest thing I tell people, this is what I do for myself. If I don't know something or if I'm bad at something, go read a book, right? It's just, there's plenty of books on the subject. And two of the resources that I used, one was given to me by a friend, one I just searched for on Amazon. The first book that helped me realize how much more I need to improve as a communicator and as a conflict resolution person is The Four Conversations by a couple named Jeff and Lori Ford. Of the Four Conversations, there's a specific one called Closure Conversations, where if you are working in an organization and things don't go as expected, you need to have a closure conversation, right? It's like part of it is, okay, you have to hold them accountable. You have to apologize for the fact that something went wrong, even if it's not your fault. And you have to make sure that you're intentional about how to restore that integrity in the relationship and the organization so that things can go back to normal and things can be productive and meet expectations. So part of my approach lends from that kind of conversation. And another book from Amazon that I just randomly said, hey, you know what? Let's see what's out there. Difficult Conversations, clear enough, right? Just read the book and see what happens. And so part of the turning points that I got from these books in terms of making me more effective at this is to remember that the person that you have to address is on the same team, right? You have to want what's best for them. You have to recognize that you guys are working toward a same goal, whether it's helping your company's bottom line or recognizing, hey, I can't just pin them for something I think they did wrong. If I do that, they're just, even if I'm right and I kind of twist their arm into agreeing with me, it just makes for a bad relationship. Plenty of married couples, friends tell me, the guy will be like, I won the argument. And we're like, what did you win? The right to sleep on the couch? Like, what's the long-term gain if you manage to say, yes, I am right? And so when a common saying that a lot of leadership books say is that you have to want what's best for the other person. That doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's pleasant. And they may not even appreciate the fact that you want what's best for them. But if you can frame it for their benefit and they honestly see that you can, like this, the reason you care about them so much is the reason you're having this conversation to address difficult things, you realize that the opposite of love is not pain. The opposite of love is apathy.
Wow. I like that. So if you're coaching somebody and they're talking about a conflict they have, and right now the conflict is only in their mind because there's been no confrontation.
Fair enough.
Do you have any guidelines to let them know, like, maybe that's not something that you need to even worry about? Like that's your problem, not theirs.
Yeah. Great question. Yeah. I remember in another podcast, we talked about, what if you have that uncle at a family reunion that you never see like once a year, right? And then he just gives you all the spiel on what he thinks your life should be. The host asks you, do you engage that? And I'm just like, why? It's just, there's not a lot of stakes. It's one thing to just dismiss like a distant uncle. It's another when your wife is upset and you're just like, no, honey, it's not an issue. I guess the first question I like to ask is this a preference or a principle that's being violated? Because that usually helps distinguish, is they do things a certain way that's kind of annoying, even if it gets the job done, right? Or is this something where it's like, no, like we're, they're actively ripping people off and we need to stop that kind of, stakes. And so part of it is that, and part of it is just to look at maybe the consequences that the behavior is having on other people on the team or within like those immediate circles. Because if someone is, let's say you have an employee who likes to take longer lunches than everyone else, right? Okay. Do they still get work done? Are they productive? Sure. But are other team members resentful of the fact that this person is taking longer lunches? Okay. So even if I'm not bothered by it, if I see the overall consequences are negative in a holistic manner, maybe I go say something, right? And to not even just pin them, again, you have to go in with curiosity and humility and just say, hey, let me study this a little more. Let me slow down. Let me get their perspective on this, on how they feel like their actions are affecting the team and not just how I see it.
So go in with curiosity. I like that. Can you talk more about that? Like, how do you go in with curiosity to the guy that's late for lunch?
Yeah, it's it's something I have to learn over and over again, right? But I think you just go in and you say, "Hey, can I get your opinion on something?" Because it really is. You're not trying to like, you know, bait and switch and say, "Okay, let me just kind of like open them up a little bit," and then like, ram them with like the big problem, right?
Right.
You have to go in and say, "Hey, can I discuss this with you? Can I get your perspective on this?" On something that I need to help, I need your help dealing with. And you can say, of course, why wouldn't they want to share their opinion? You have to be objective with the data. You can't just say, well, this is how I feel. Like you want to go in and say, hey, look, I'm getting some feedback from some of the other teammates about long lunches, and I checked your time card, and these are your right now. You have objective data to say, hey, look, I'm not just making this up. Like, this is evidence that we have, that we're not saying we're going to use this against you. We just need you to help address it, right? And you say, hey, look, your lunches, you're taking an hour when everyone else is taking half an hour. And even if you're willing to take maybe a pay cut because you don't want to, a shorter lunch, the team is saying that that's not fair because you're not as available to help get the work done while you're here. How do you want to respond to that? Right. And you leave it very open because, as I say, I am one human with one set of eyes and therefore one perspective. Right. I have blind spots. I can only know so much. And so when people realize that there's only so much that I can know about a situation, instead of feeling, well, I'm smart and I've already, filled in all the missing gaps with the story that makes sense to me, then it's easier to go in and say, hey, look, I need your help with this. Can you help me put together the whole picture so that we can decide if there is indeed a problem, that we can discuss a solution for it.
Wow. I like that. And it seems like in that approach, do you ever find that sometimes the offending party ends up solving their own problem just by you bringing it up? The person who's, let's say, taking too long a lunch
Mm-hmm.
would be like, yeah, I probably should only take a half hour lunch, especially if other people are bothered by it. Do people do that?
The best ones do. The best ones, yeah. And in coaching, and this is something I hope every leader understands and appreciates, is that you don't have to be the hero. Like, you don't have to come up with the solution for them, because the irony is that if you spoon feed solutions to your team, sometimes that's necessary. Like in a crisis mode, people just want a lighted path to the finish line. Sure, lay it out for them, right? But people, we learn in coaching, and maybe you've seen this in your own experience, right? People may not always do what you tell them, but they always do what they tell themselves, right? So if you say, hey, what is one thing you could do differently so that we can avoid these consequences, and that we can have a better team dynamic, and they can say, yeah, let me set a timer. Maybe I set a timer, so that I make sure I don't go over on time when I take a lunch or something like that. Let me set a 30-minute timer. You say, okay, and you just check with them, right? Because sometimes the solutions need a little help, right? Maybe they need a little tinkering. Maybe they didn't, anticipate everything when they came up with the solution, right? But yeah, you have to account for the fact that some people say, well, thank you for bringing this to my attention. I disagree with it entirely, which is the climate for a lot of society these days, unfortunately.
Right.
But yeah, for the people that are wise and coachable, the ones that you want to keep around because they have a right attitude, and they're humble and recognize that you want what's best for them. Yeah, usually they come up with the solution on their own, and you can say, okay, yeah, let's start that out, and maybe let's try for a week, see how that goes, right? There's nothing official in terms of write-ups. You're not on probation, not in trouble. We just want your help in terms of how you want to adjust things so that things go better for us as a group. So yes, the best ones are, you have to trust that people are creative, resourceful, and whole in that regard. So yeah, let them stand on their 2 feet for sure.
Okay. It's funny. I just thought about it right after I asked you the question. I think the reason I asked you the question was because I was hoping that there was some way that you could do conflict resolution without any conflict. And then I realized how ridiculous that was. Obvious. So it's just interesting that I was already trying to avoid conflict using, like you found a way to do this without any conflict, but doesn't work that way, does it?
Well, there's healthy conflict and unhealthy conflict, right? The problem is not whether or not there's conflict, because there's always conflict, whether it's conflict between who you are now and who you want to be, right? That's a healthy conflict where you say, hey, like me being this successful has got me this far. And I know I'm going to have to do new things if I want to grow my business or become a more patient person or a more skilled person at something, right? And so every company, I think, has that conflict, and they recognize that it's not that it has to go away. It's just more about how are you leveraging it to really bring out the best in your people, right? The one blessing I tell people, I didn't realize this until I dealt with enough conflict, was that you get to see people for who they are, who they actually are. Like, it is honestly on the table. If you're upset with me, it means you're being honest with me about how upset you are, right? You're not like, glossing things over, things like that. So the conflict may not be big. It still may be uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, there is some discrepancy in expectations that you need to address and account for. And so when you realize, hey, you know what? It's like when someone told me, hey, you know what? Rejection is a part of life, right? Conflict's a part of life. And when you realize, you know what? It's not like some personal attack on my character or competence. It's just something I have to deal with if I'm going to be a leader or if I'm going to be in meaningful relationships, right? The most meaningful relationships I have and the most fulfilling, it's not because of a lack of conflict. It's more that we do enough preventive maintenance so that we don't end up in needless conflict.
Okay. I tell my listeners all the time about getting through adversity and how it makes you stronger. And conflict is part of that adversity. Yes. Wouldn't you say conflict is one, probably a third of the adversity that you come across?
In
life.
Maybe more. Yeah. And maybe more. Like, I mean, if you really are willing to get higher stakes, I mean, you're going to deal with conflict. I mean, it is inevitable. And if you don't like conflict, well, you can still be effective, because you don't have to like it to still engage it, right? Like, I didn't want to work out this morning, but I still did, right? There's a level of professionalism that says, you know what, I don't like this, but I'm gonna have to do it anyway. It's like you said, whether it's confronting somebody, I've had to write people up, I've had to fire people, I had to evict a roommate at one point, and you just realize that unless you move the ball yourself, they are not gonna move it for you, right? They don't even want to believe that there's a problem until you address it with them. And you have to be like this powerful mirror and just say, hey, look, you can't ignore this. I'm not telling you what to do with it. I just need you to decide what to do with it.
Well, then I'm going to go back for the listeners here and correct what I said, because the paradigm that you're using for conflict is adversity. Whether somebody disagrees with you or even if it hails on your crops and how you deal with that, they're both conflicts of some sort.
Yeah.
So interesting. All right.
Yeah. I mean, it's adversity. I remember reading Lewis Howes' book, School of Greatness, and it talks about, you're only as strong as the adversity makes you. And, we don't want to admit that, no one likes suffering. No one likes, pain or, like unpleasant things or discomfort. But the people that I respect the most don't let that stand in the way of what they're going for. So yeah, whether you want to label conflict as adversity or not, because it doesn't have to be a big conflict, right? And like, it might be just a misunderstanding about what time you're going to meet for dinner with someone. You're like, right. Oh, it's adversity. You don't have to make a mountain out of a molehill. You just have to recognize, hey, you know what? There's something broken here and we just need to fix it. Whether it's a small toy or, big stakes dilemma, we just have to run toward the gunfire.
Right. Yeah. Tim Ferriss said that your success is entirely dependent on the amount of uncomfortable conversations you're willing to have.
Amen.
And I love that. So I think it's fascinating what you do. And I think it's where you started with conflict being your weakness. And you are actually taking your weakness and turning it into a strength now. This is what you're teaching. And that to me is very fantastic. I love it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Well, it's a humbling road for sure. Right. Because I never would have expected if someone told me, when you hit 40, you're going to transition from healthcare into and starting your own coaching practice. I would have been like, I don't even know what a leadership coach is. Right. And so it's like, I tell people this isn't the path I would have picked for myself, but it's exactly the path I picked for myself. And, I'm happy that I'm able to turn around and help people and say, hey, you know what, let's strengthen our relationships. Don't make the same mistakes I did. I've learned some great lessons. I'm not going to cry over the spilled milk or anything like that, because that's just part of the process. But yeah, excited to turn around and say, hey, are you struggling with this? Yeah, let's talk about it. You're not a bad person. You don't have to feel incompetent. You don't have to do any of that. We just need to, give you some belief in yourself that you can actually grow and learn from this thing. It's actually a blessing in your life to grow and mature as a person.
Okay. And so as you as you coach people or talk to them about some problem that they may be causing, is them taking personal offense usually the biggest thing you have to get through?
Yeah, I think, because I think about where I've struggled, and I think about the conversations I've had with my coaching clients, and usually it is some kind of thing that they they just feel it's like a personal affront. Like one example is, so a client who she manages like an art studio, or helps manage an art studio. He called her after hours. She did not pick up because, she's off the clock. And then he just blew up at her the next day. And she's like, I need your help. Like, how do I confront him without getting fired? Because I'm afraid that if he just loses his temper when I basically tell him how much he's upset me, that he's just going to dismiss me for good. And so we talked through that to say, hey, look, affirm things like affirm the relationship, affirm that you want to get back to like a point where you guys can enjoy being around each other and working with each other well, and hey, here are some things that I need your help processing in order to get back to this point of a respectful relationship. How do we do that? Right. And you invite him to collaborate on a solution instead of just trying to fire bullets, and get him to hopefully admit that he maybe was in the wrong. And because if he gets defensive and he says, you know what, I don't have to deal with this. I don't need to deal with this, and just cut. It's like, okay, yeah, it's just more about, okay, how do we get past like those feelings? Because we don't want to ignore them, right? We're human. We have feelings. We just need to let them process and figure out, okay, what kind of story is this telling me? What story am I telling myself about the situation? And is this helpful? Yes or no? If it's not, okay, what's a more useful story? What's the more productive angle to look at this in order to get back to me being able to exhale and go back to focusing on what I need to be doing?
Okay. So is there an attitude that I could adopt right now so that if I am causing a problem somewhere and someone approaches me about it, how can I be, or how can I act that's going to make this easy for them to resolve if I'm the one causing the problem?
Matt, you asked some great questions. Like, I think so if we rewind just what you just said and ask me, that is exactly the kind of question you need to ask, to say, okay, regardless of, it's not about finger pointing, right? It's just, in designing your work life, they talk about, just ask them, like, what am I doing wrong? It's that simple, right? Just say, hey, or even if you don't want to admit that you're doing something wrong, or if that comes across like you don't want to admit to anything, just say, what do I need to do differently? Like, what actions do you need me to take so that we can, get back to being around each other, or, getting past this issue or things like that, right? We refer to this idea of responsibility, like the ability to respond, right? And to say, take ownership of the situation, to say, even if I only am responsible for 2% of that situation, let me own up, let me do 100% of that 2%, right? It's like, okay, let me own up to all of it. And so when you go in, kind of like you said, right? When you go in with a humble and curious attitude, oh, wow, you're angry with me. Yeah, tell me more, right? And you lean into it, right? Instead of push back, you don't go, oh no, like they're mad at me. I better, maybe we cool it for 5 minutes, and maybe that's helpful. But but if you're humble and you're curious and you have empathy for the other person, say, wow, like, I'm sorry that somehow like I did something to upset you, because this relationship is important to me. Tell me, what do I need to do differently so that we can get back to a place of respect and harmony? Yeah.
Okay. It's great. Yeah. I think when I get an expert on conflict resolution, it's like, I'm going to turn you into my coach while I have you on the line here. Right.
Sure. Yeah. Milk it. Yeah.
So that's where that question came from. I'm like, how do I do it? I do not do it well right now. And I started thinking, yeah, I do take kind of personal offense at times. Like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, or whatever. Any of those things that your mind is going to come up with as a little barrier to not feel weak somehow. And so that's good though. Just approach with a humble attitude. I like the lean into it. I'm going to listen to this podcast again and make some notes here.
Wow. Look at you, students of your own work. I love it.
That's good. That's why I started this whole thing, man. I said, I'm going to talk to everybody in different areas, and I'm going to learn as much as I possibly can doing the show. So
awesome.
So on those lines, I read on your profile on Podmatch that you had 3 life hacks that I could ask you about. Oh, and so I'm very curious about those.
Yeah, I feel like there's like six of them, and I'm just like, well, which ones do I shuffle in? But
Hey, I'll take all six.
yeah, well, let me see what I can remember off the top of my head. I mean, three life hacks. So some of my personal favorites that I use, some of it, one shout out to Tim Ferriss for recommending this. Set yourself reminders on your phone, but to not remind yourself of specific tasks, but to ask yourself like the meaningful questions to ask yourself throughout the day. Like I set one at 11 that says, "What is your hesitation costing you?" And you're like, "Oh, right." And then I have another one at noon that says, "What is the most important thing you should be working on right now?" It's like, okay, I need to probably get off ESPN and, get to what I need to be doing, right? I need to work on another blog post.
Right.
And then the one that has gotten the best feedback is at 7 o'clock, I have one that says, how can you make the rest of your day productive? Like, how can you basically save like the rest of your time? Right. And it just helps center me in a way to say, hey, you know what? I've been putting this off, for a while. Okay, let me just get on Podmatch and, apply to, 2 more podcasts or something like that. So that is one life hack, is just to ask yourself, like, don't set reminders up just for tasks, but set them up to make you think, right? Build in reflection time, even if it's just for a moment. So that's number one. Number two, the question that I got from David Allen's Getting Things Done, which is one of my favorite books to talk people through, is they ask the question, what's the next action? Because it undermines the victim mentality and it gets people to stop complaining and thinking about, well, what should I be doing about this, right? So instead of just like complaining about how big a problem it is and how unfair it is that they shouldn't have to deal with it, then you can say, well, what's the next action? And you're like, right? And then now you kind of diffuse all that and it's gone. Number three, life hack: design your environment in a way that makes you productive. And it sounds contrived and it sounds easy until people realize just how distraction prone they are. So the specific life hack I'll give is that anytime I need to get something done, I need to focus on something, I put my phone well beyond reach, like out of sight, out of mind. So if I'm working, if my computer is downstairs, I put my phone upstairs away from everything where I can't even hear it. I don't, like, even if there's urgent calls, it's okay. Like I'll get to it, right? So that's life hack number three, is put your phone like in a way away so that you can focus on what you're doing. Let's see, a couple others that I like. This may sound small, but it really is. I mean, it helps me out so much. Put stuff in front of the door. Like when I go to the gym, half the time I forget the water bottle that I need to take with me. And in Houston, the water is terrible. And so like I deliberately bring my own water so I don't have to drink like tap water, which is terribly, contaminated even after they try to clean it. So it's like, okay, anything that I need to keep in my car, like I'll put the water bottle in my car the night before, things like that, so that, if I'm in a rush in the morning, it's already there. I already counted for the fact that I tend to forget things. Number 5, 10 seconds of courage. That is a phrase I got from a friend a couple of years ago. Anytime you're struggling, and it works for this conflict resolutions. In fact, it's actually in the framework that I teach, in the free PDF I have on my website. Find 10 seconds of courage to reach out. You're just like, I don't have to be Superman. I don't have to be Wonder Woman. Let me just get 10 seconds of courage to send that email or send that text or pick up the phone and just get that ball rolling. And then I guess one last bonus one, script your critical moves. Like if you don't have a plan of attack, right? If you don't rehearse what you're going to say in the middle of a difficult conversation, you're probably not going to say it. So the more role playing you do beforehand, right? And I have to preach this to myself as much as anybody else. Let me make sure that I can clearly say what I'm going to say before I need to actually say it. Get your reps in at the dojo before you start fighting on the street, kind of thing.
Definitely. I love it. In regards to the last one, to script your moves, if let's say I had to leave a phone message for someone, I would write down everything that I need to make sure that I have said in the message. And sometimes I actually script it out and read it. And I use an app a lot with the people I work with called Voxer. And it's like a walkie-talkie. It's just text messaging with voice. I mean, you can do it on Facebook and all that, but
awesome.
I have this chance to write down what I need to say to them and make sure that it's nice and scripted. But if I were going into a live conversation, how does it look if I bring in my notes of the things that I want to check off that I want to say?
I mean, you can approach it one of two ways, right? Either you can be discreet about it right? And just like, don't show them everything, just keep it on your phone where they don't know how long the list is, right? So that's one way of doing it. Or you just need to rehearse it beforehand. Jim Quick, Kwik, in his book Limitless, talks about using the loci method, where you use a visual signal in the room for each of the talking points that you want to make, if you know what the room that you're going to be in. And you just need to leverage that. Yeah, that one was brilliant. Of all the things that he talks about, he has a lot of good stuff in there. The whole book and his life story is inspiring, from how he recovered from a childhood brain damage injury to become like this brain coach for celebrities in Google and stuff like that. But when he mentioned that method, I was just like, I will be telling people about this, because you use this lamp means that this is talking point number one, like the plant in the corner, that's talking point number two, and just on and on and on. So,
that's excellent to know. I am 3/4 of the way through that book right now. And I keep looking at the chapter because he's got the memory section. Yeah. And the memory section's longer than any other section. And I'm like looking forward to getting to it, but I don't want to skip there. So, that's great. That is great.
Yeah.
All right. So I've got one more question to ask you, but first I want to throw out there, where do you want me to send people?
Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search for Jerry Fu, or go to the website, www.adaptingleaders.com. From there, you can download the free PDF guide on how the framework on how to have hard conversations, or you can schedule a free complimentary 30-minute phone call, whether to share your story or a situation you need help with. No strings attached, just experience coaching and the benefits of it. If you want to hire me for an official coaching package or bring me to your organization, we can talk about that. But I want to be completely transparent to say, hey, you know what, the PDF guide and the 30-minute call, complimentary. Please enjoy those for anyone's benefit.
All right. Outstanding. Yeah. So if you had 43 seconds and you had the entire world on the stage or on the phone, what would you tell them?
First thing is, how, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much self-awareness do you have? And then number 2, what kind of legacy do you want to leave? I would just ask those 2 questions, and let's see how people react.
Excellent. That sounds like a conflict resolution coach right there.
Yep.
Just ask them a couple questions and make them think.
Absolutely.
All right. That's beautiful. Loved having you on the show. I want to thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Hey, no problem. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. We'll be in touch.
Have a wonderful day. Bye.
You too. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Second Mix podcast. I am Matt Bennett. Please leave a review and give me an honest rating wherever you can. Subscribe on your favorite platform to hear the latest episodes. You can send an email to matt@secondmix.net or go to secondmix.net to read the blog, check out the resources, buy me a cup of coffee, and you can even leave me a voicemail right there on the site. Take steps that will make your week incredible and keep reflecting, revising, and remixing your life. I'll see you soon.